This is Synthesis Weave, Book 1, 2nd edition, by Rexx Deane. I apologise for any sounds in the background. Just recording this live. Forward. Most futuristic sci-fi approaches disability with the aim of fixing it, and the march of scientific progress inevitably renders most medical conditions curable, leaving those without a cure still reliant on technology. Synthesis Weave takes an alternative path. In an optimistic future where most environments are accessible, prejudice still exists and acceptance is a barrier for those left behind. The goal of the central character is not an idealistic dream of walking, but that of independence, regardless of the means, and his confidence and attitude puts this novel in a place with very few other writers. Sitting comfortably next to Asimov or Aldous, Heinlein or Herbert in your sci-fi collection, this story challenges stereotypes while drawing the reader in with a gripping yarn that makes Synthesis Weave a game-changer. Mick Scarlett, broadcaster, actor and musician. Chapter 1. Sebastian had never seen sand of such a deep crimson, and as he stood on the beach he couldn't even guess where in the galaxy it could be found. He looked up to locate a familiar constellation. Even though the intense purple sky hadn't seemed that bright, he shielded his eyes as he scanned the horizon. The silky golden glow of the larger of the two suns reflected off the oily black sea that slopped silently at the shore, but aside from that the skyline was featureless. A gentle breeze brought with it an unfamiliar tang, and as he ran a hand over his close-cropped hair it came away sticky. How did I get here? It was like a dream. He couldn't remember arriving, landing in a shuttle, or being dropped off by a ship. He looked at his wristcom. The time showed 22:64:09:01:03:08. There was no way he'd got in a ship, unless he'd somehow missed half the night, and he must have been prepared for the trip. Why else would he have his old canvas backpack slung over his shoulder? As he stared at the contours in the sand around his booted feet, he traced the shadows cast by the low suns, and the question of how he'd arrived was soon forgotten. He turned to look inland, where large, smooth slabs of sea-worn red stone formed a high cliff. About 200 yards along to the right stood an opening, outlined with long upright blocks that tapered towards the heavy lintel above. It wasn't natural. Curiosity overtook him, and he made his way towards it. The low angle of the suns cast his shadow through the opening and did little to illuminate the space beyond. The suns were almost submerged in the dark waters, and a dense mist had begun to form. The horizon's shadow crept up the beach, drawing the mist with it. Overcome by the need to satisfy his curiosity, he took the antique oil lamp from his rucksack and searched his pockets for something with which to light it. He reached into his station uniform's jacket and found a solitary match. Odd that something like that would be in his pocket rather than a multi-tool, given that open flames were banned on the station. He struck the match against a stone and lit the lamp. Holding it above his head, he made his way into the darkness, and as he followed the smooth steps downward, a damp draught caught the hairs on the back of his neck and made them stand on end. After several metres, the stairway ended in a space that extended off into darkness beyond the lamp's reach. The chill had made him feel uneasy, and he looked back again. Sea mist flowed down the steps and gathered round his feet. The lamp sputtered, and the flame dwindled to a tiny blue glow. Something crunched in the darkness. Footfall on the sandy floor behind him. With a final guttering pop, the flame went out. He held his breath. There was no sound except for his pulse pounding in his ears. Had he imagined it? His eyes became accustomed to the dark, and the sea mist around his feet glowed. He must be hallucinating. Another crunch. This was no hallucination. He should run, escape, get away from whatever it was behind him. He tried to turn, but the mist dragged at his feet and legs as though made of molasses. The thrum of blood in the veins in his neck filled his ears. He had to calm down, slow down, to stop struggling so he could hear. From the darkness came a grunt of a breath, not his own. His hand went to the small bronze Mjolnir necklace at his throat, and he froze. Oh gods, there was something here, something lurking behind him. Warm air wafted on his neck, accompanied by a deep snort and touch of something sharp, claw-like on his shoulder. He whirled around to face it, and screamed. Lights! Sebastian sat bolt upright and flung the bed covers off. His forehead was slick with sweat, and his heart hammered in his ribcage. The bedside lamp lit dimly, doing little to drive away the terror that clung in the corners of his mind. The shadowy brushed metal walls of the single-room apartment did nothing to comfort him. It was the 5th time he'd had a nightmare in the last few weeks, and like all the other occasions he couldn't remember exactly what had caused him to wake up. He swung his feet to the floor and sat for a moment before getting a glass of water from the kitchen. I have to find out what's causing these nightmares, he said, more to reassure himself than anything else. A shrill beep sounded from the other end of the room, and he nearly dropped the glass. It was only the terminal opposite the bed. He walked over to investigate. Incoming call. The time on the console read 03:10. Why would it let her call in at that time of the morning? Who is it? Janice Hastingsdottir, the computer said. He sighed. For a sister-in-law she was wonderful, but God, she could be so inconsiderate at times. Except... A pale face with straight auburn hair appeared. Hello, Seb. Hi, Jan. Sebastian rubbed his forehead and blinked in the brightness of the screen. You always forget about the time difference. Her face went slack. Sorry, I can call back later if you like. No, it's fine. I just got up. I can't sleep. He sat on the bed and gulped down a mouthful of water. What do you need? A favour. Eric's stuck with his homework and has a presentation to do tomorrow. I wondered if you'd be able to help. He yawned. Sure. Oh, thank you. She gestured off to one side. Eric? A boy, little more than 11 years old, appeared, and Janice moved out of view. Even though he had black hair, he clearly had his mother's features. Hi, Eric. Not seen you for a while. You're growing. I've just got some bigger shoes. I'm nearly in adult sizes. Good for you. Now what's this homework? My teacher said we have to find out what a computer TI is and why it's not the same as AI. The boy pouted. The school's locked the computers down on the subject. I could hack in and unlock them for you, but that would be cheating, not to mention against the law. They don't want you using the computer to find out. It shows you they want you to learn about it by yourself. I'll point you in the right direction. The boy's expression brightened. TI stands for Turing Intelligence, although it's more of an interface. But what does that mean? Sebastian yawned again. I'm too tired to explain it all now, but you should have time to read up on it before tomorrow. Go to the old library and look up Alan Turing in the history section. There might be information on AI there too. They gave up on that research hundreds of years ago. It was complex and the public was scared AI might go rogue and become dangerous if it were ever developed. Mama said you used to program things like it. I want to be a programmer like you one day. It sounds exciting. I hope I get a good grade. Sebastian smiled. As long as you put it in your own words, I'm sure you'll do fine. It made a change for someone to want to be like him. His own father had been disappointed that Sebastian hadn't wanted to follow him into police work like his brother Michael had. If he'd still been around, maybe he would have been satisfied that Sebastian was working in security. Then again, nothing Sebastian ever did seemed to make his father happy. Thanks, Eric said, dragging Sebastian's thoughts back to the present. He turned away and immediately looked back. Did you get any pictures of you with an alien? No, not yet. I haven't had a chance to speak to any, but I'll be sure to forward some to your mother if I do. And it's yourself with an alien. Eric laughed. You're so funny. I'll put Mama back on. He disappeared and Janice came back. Thanks for that, Seb. I really appreciate it. She stared at the floor for several seconds. I wish I could help him as much as his father used to. You're doing fine. If you need anything, let me know. Now you mention it, I could do some more money towards Eric's school fees. They're up for renewal soon and things are a bit tight. Michael's pension doesn't quite cover it. Sebastian rubbed his forehead. Just what he needed. Things are a bit tight here too, with station cutbacks, but I'll send you some. Not having to pay for this apartment has its advantages. Just do me one favour. Don't call at 3 a.m. in future. She laughed. I'm sorry about that. I'll put an automatic block on my terminal. That'll stop me. It's good to hear from you, Jan. Stay well. He smiled. You too. Speak to you again. Give my love to Rexx. She signed off. More money. Not the best of news, but at least it had taken his mind off the nightmare. He finished the glass of water and tried to get back to sleep. He later woke to the dream intrusion of a giant gong struck in an ancient temple, his alarm going off for the third time. The clock now read 06:30. He'd be late for work if he didn't get moving. By the gods, he'd forgotten to cancel yesterday's early alarm. There didn't seem to be much point in going back to bed, at least not with his system full of adrenaline, so he got up and popped the ultrasonic tooth cleaner into his mouth while he washed. After a light breakfast of myco bacon and toast, he got dressed, pulling on his brown uniform with disdain. It was reminding him of a 21st century courier's outfit rather than that of a security officer. He made his way to the lift terminal. With nearly 2 hours to spare for work, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to take the scenic route. He needed the change of pace to clear his fuzzy, sleep-deprived head. He stepped out of the lift and onto a polished white walkway of the atrium's lower terrace and made his way to the jetty. The faint rushing splash of the nearby weir momentarily broke as the river's ride skimmed over the lip and came to rest at the platform. The gondola dipped as he boarded, and he pressed his thumb against the info slate mounted by the seating and flopped down on the cushions. 3/4 circuit. The craft moved off, purring quietly to itself. High terraced walls and tumbling grassy banks rolled by. Sunlight streamed in through the filters in the glass ceiling. They displayed a deep blue sky with bright-edged clouds. He squinted and sat back, glad of the warmth on his face. The atrium was one of the few places on the station where you could get genuine sunshine after all. The small boat drifted past the crisp white architecture of riverside shops and cafes, where humans and other races congregated amidst the gaggle and chatter of daily business and the clink of cutlery on plates. The aroma of hot fresh coffee mingled with the mossy cool of the river and warm caress of spice flowers on the banks, reminding him of his mother's baking. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly. It certainly tasted better than the recycled atmosphere elsewhere on the station. A man dashed along a terrace where the trees were being watered. His jacket pulled up over his head in a vain attempt to save himself from getting wet. Sebastian laughed. It was like a scene from an old Earth movie. A tall, slender woman with blonde hair held back by a bright headband jogged past beneath the raining spray. She ran with her eyes closed and her head tipped back, apparently with no regard to how wet her lycra running suit became. "Karen!" Sebastian shouted. She continued jogging. "Karen Tallinn!" She stopped under a large birch tree and opened her eyes. "Seb, what are you doing out so early?" "I couldn't sleep. I'll see you down there." The river ride passed the acceptable distance for conversation, and he pointed to the next jetty. "I'm getting off." She waved and ran after him. Sebastian looked back as the gondola made its way up the curve of the river. She looked like she was running downhill. He'd never get used to that perspective. 2 minutes later, the craft came to a halt at the jetty near the lift and let him off. A lone figure sat on one of the benches in the small parkland terrace a short distance from the terminal. Drawing closer, it was obvious the figure wasn't human. Its shoulders were far too narrow, and its hair irregular chunks of dense brown sponge intertwined with a leafy wreath. Several small orange fruits arranged between the waxy foliage caught Sebastian's attention. As he stared, the being turned. His heart stopped. The face was of a type he recognised from security briefings. The light ochre skin, the flat, almost non-existent nose with thin nostrils, the large, golden, almond-shaped eyes that slanted up at the outer corners, the small ears and slim arms that showed little in the way of muscularity. A Folian. It wore a long, shimmering black robe with threads in the fabric that complemented the colour of its hair. The satiny tapestry of gold, bronze and black drew the eye in, like staring into a giant distant galaxy, its complexity so deep, so soothing. "Greetings," the Folian said softly, its voice soft and genderless. "Can we help you in some way?" He had to find an excuse to speak to the creature. "Forgive me, I've not seen one of your kind before." Its piercing eyes scanned him up and down, and a faint smile played across its thin lips. "You're forgiven. My name is Sebastian Thorson. I work in the security office. I don't think we've received security protocols for your ships." It was a terrible excuse, but enough to break the ice. "Greetings, Sebastian Thorson," the Folian said with the slightest of nods. "We are Ambassador Tolinar, and in answer to your question, our ships do not integrate with your systems." Its eyes smiled. "The protocols are unnecessary." "Oh, I'll make a note of that on our records, thank you." He slowly turned to leave. "Is there anything else we can help you with?" "Actually, I know this might seem inappropriate, but may I have a photograph taken with you?" The Folian tilted its head to one side. "Photograph?" "A static image recording." The alien's features smoothed. "Of course you may." It smiled again. He looked around. Who could take the picture for him? A glistening Karen came jogging along the walkway. Perfect timing. He beckoned to her. "Greetings," she said with a bow as she tried to catch her breath. The ambassador nodded. "Can you take a picture of the ambassador and me?" Sebastian held out his wristcom. She stepped back and held it up. "Say cheese." He grinned. A moment later she handed it back. "I'll meet you at the lift," she said, and headed off. "Thank you, Ambassador. My nephew will be very happy. It's the first time I've had an opportunity to speak directly to someone of another race in 3 years I've worked here." "We are glad to have given you the opportunity for a new experience," Tolinar said, nodding slowly. "We hope that your nephew enjoys the image." Sebastian bowed his head in mimicry, hoping it was the correct etiquette, and bid the alien farewell. He turned to continue his journey to the lift and glanced back at the fruits in the Folian's wreath. Were they bigger than when he'd first set eyes on them? No, they couldn't be. It must have been his eyes playing tricks. Karen stood at the lift with one hand on her hip. "So why are you having trouble sleeping?" "I've been having bad dreams lately, and this morning's episode woke me up." "I've had some weird dreams too, but nothing that's disturbed my sleep." "Hey, have you heard the news?" "Security level 3, Sebastian said, addressing the lift. "Depends on what news you've heard." "There's a spec ops agent on the station." Her eyes were wide. "Really?" He'd dreamt of getting an exciting job like that, but special security projects and operations was well out of his league. It would be a dream come true just to meet an agent. "Apparently he's here interviewing, something to do with redundancies." She folded her arms. "As much as I can't stand her, I hope Bannock doesn't get the sack. She gets the job done." "Oh, gods, do you know who they're firing?" If Spec Ops had sent out an agent to issue redundancies, something big had to be going on. "Not a clue. Just heard a rumour going round that they'd selected someone based on their psych test." "Oh." He swallowed hard. Karen grinned. "Don't be such a depressor. You're awful." She leaned against the wall of the lift in mimicry of I'm a little teapot with one hand on her hip. I'm a mechanical depressive. Here's my handle. Here's my support mechanism. She laughed at her own joke. He laughed. She was so stupid sometimes. Look, you're good at your job, she said. I'm sure you'll be here for a long time to come. The lift stopped and they both stepped out. I'm off to the changing room. I'll see you around. And cheer up. She headed off down the corridor. It was fine for her. She was bright and bubbly all the time. If Spec Ops was making redundancies based on psych tests, he was for the chop. He was only a security programmer after all, and they'd surely think him too prone to panic and idle daydreaming to even consider keeping him on. As he entered the security department, his supervisor, Eleanor Bannock, stepped out of her office directly into his path. I need to have a word with you, Thorson, she said, her stony glare boring deep into his skull. Can I ask what about? Just be in my office at 0900 tomorrow. The Ice Queen spun around and slammed the glass door behind her. What on earth had he done wrong? Was it, he swallowed, the redundancies? He sat at his desk to begin the day's tasks, and before he had time to dwell on his situation, an alert sounded from his workstation. Security breach detected, the computer said. What kind of breach? A systems breach in the maintenance subsystem. What effect has the breach had? Code has been inserted and is redirecting funds from the core banking system. Where did it originate? The maintenance terminal in Bay 35 on level 3 of the habitation ring. Is anyone in that bay? No. So how did the hack originate there? Do you mean nobody's actually in the bay, or nobody's registered to it? Nobody is registered as currently occupying the bay. Oh, it was so unhelpful. Whoever wrote the main security TI needed to be shot. Scan the bay. Is anyone present? Sensors are not functioning. Oh, God, it's Turing unintelligence. Sebastian ground his teeth. Obviously, it was going to be one of those days where the interface intelligence simulation wasn't even going to try. Check the terminal. Is it being accessed via the screen, keyboard, plug-in module, or what? If it's a manual intervention, send someone down there to catch them. Karen ran past seconds later, heading out of the office, stun stick and handcuffs hanging from her belt. Sebastian hunched over the screen, nibbling his nails, watching the dot. Her dot moved down the corridors to the bay. 10 minutes later, she burst into the office, pushing a bald, purple-robed figure, an Antari, in front of her, its hands cuffed behind its back. Sebastian stared at them as they walked past on the way to the brig. Gotcha, he said under his breath. The Antari drifted by almost as though pushed on a trolley and turned to look at him, the tops of its ears folded into points and its lips curled, turning the ordinarily serene Antari expression into a fanged snarl. Hacking was forgivable if it wasn't malicious and helped make the system better, but not when it was like this. This scumbag had been leeching off the system like a vampire. At least that was another out of the way. Karen filled out the arrest log at the desk and prodded the Antari through the door as Bannock came by. Her stare was as flat as ever, with not even a hint of recognition or gratitude on her face. This was it. He was toast. He'd never get a promotion or a better job, and he was going to lose this one. By 1700 he'd completed the day's tasks. All the required security fixes had been put in and new protocols written. It was good to finally get out of the office, even though it brought tomorrow closer. That night sleep came in short passages, punctuated with a jumble of work-related images that drifted through his mind, snagging on his consciousness. Tiny problems magnified 1,000 times consumed all of his attention while meaning little. The images eventually stopped, leaving him hanging weightless in the dark. How had he come to be in that predicament? It was like zero-G. What a strange feeling, almost like falling. As the wind whistled in his ears, it didn't occur to him it might be dangerous. He caught a dry, dusty odour, and the darkness peeled back to reveal the walls of a grey, rocky shaft hurtling past. Something trailed down through the centre of the tunnel close to him. A rope? He reached out and grasped it. The rope bit into his hands, cutting deep. His fingers stung at first, then burnt, and the sensation erupted in a roar of pain that consumed his arms. He gripped tighter and tighter, but fought against the reflex to hold on and let go. The bones of his fingers were exposed and etched with deep striations. He held his hands away from himself in disgust, and screamed as the floor of the shaft rushed up to meet him.